Hi everyone, on today's episode on Through Your Eyes, we have Kris Rumman, who's pretty much going to talk about her journey being an artist in today's world and how being a Palestinian has kind of shaped who she is in her art. So thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure. I'm honored.
Tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and like where you come from.
Yeah, my name's Kris Rumman. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I'm first generation Palestinian-American. I think that's important mainly because it's shaped a lot of my life or maybe my internal worlds, and then that comes out in other ways. I'm an artist, so it comes out in visual ways, I think, mostly. My background is in glassmaking. Toledo has this great history, so when I was really young, I got connected to this material and kind of have followed it into these different places. I lived on the West Coast. I went to school for it in undergrad and also graduate school. Lived in Philadelphia. Now I currently live in Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. So what brought you to Erie?
I have had this amazing opportunity to be the artist in residence through the Erie Arts Council. Arts and Culture, I think, is the full name. And for me, I was really interested in coming to Erie because of this vast population of new Americans, and I think I'm really interested in that subject matter and the sort of process of becoming a part of this country and making it its complex, this complex fabric that is America, and sort of especially at that really particular moment of just arriving, and then, I am the affect of my father's journey, so I'm like a product of the next generation of what's happening here in Erie all the time.
So tell me a little bit more about your family. Obviously, you just like touched a little bit about your dad. Yeah. So like when they migrate, if you know, and like kind of how your childhood was and how they've like shaped your like kind of dreams of being an artist.
Yeah, I have an amazing family, and so my dad grew up in Beit Jala, which is a small town on a hill, like right above Bethlehem. And in '68, my grandfather was in politics, and so he was actually a diplomat and worked in Central America mainly. And when things got difficult there, it wasn't safe for him to return. He might be a political prisoner. So he had a brother in Ann Arbor, where there's a huge Arab population in that region, so he ended up moving there and then bringing the kids later. So that was my dad's journey. He came to the U.S. not speaking English at all, 15 years old, and with his sisters and brothers. One stayed behind because we still have our house there. And she was the oldest. She was asked to sort of stay and protect the house. She was getting married. And usually, of course, you live with your husband, but in this case, my grandfather asked her to live in our family home because if it was empty, it could be repossessed or possessed or taken by the Israeli government. So she's been there and on our land and in our house. So yeah, I think that part of my growing up was always knowing I had a homeland somewhere else, but also with my feet on this ground in America and growing up in American culture. Also, my mom doesn't speak Arabic, so she's Lebanese American, but third generation. So I think when she was growing up, it was very uncool to not to be foreign, right? So my grandparents, they knew Arabic, but they didn't transfer that language to them because, of course, assimilation is really important for your survival and to make it in this country. So my grandmother was an English teacher, so they have very good English. But for us, like my sisters, I have 2 sisters, we're like the only non-speaking Arabic and non-Arabic speaking people in our family. So we're like the white sheep or something, the black sheep, white sheep, I don't know. So there's like always these layers of distance that I think, even within my own family culture, like, the jokes are all told in English except for the punchline. And you're like, but what was the joke? You're sort of like a little bit out of the loop and trying to like always understand something that's a little bit outside of your reach. So I think that's something that for a long time made me feel like not enough of any of these places. But I think as I've kind of gotten older and also knowing that this is a shared experience for many people, that like maybe it's a place of power to like hold that between space. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that, like with the language thing, because I remember growing up, especially in Dearborn, like we never really, we all knew we spoke Arabic, like all my classmates, teammates, whatever, but like we never spoke Arabic to each other. It was like weird. But like now that I'm like older, I'm like, oh my God, like I love this language. Like I'm so glad, like I'm fluent in Arabic, reading and writing, and like I'm so blessed that like my parents obviously only spoke to me in Arabic growing up, so that like now I'm like fluent in it. But once you get older, I feel like there's so much value to like the Arabic, like being able to speak another language.
Why do you think you didn't speak with your friends?
I don't know. Like I said, I feel like it was like a cool thing to like. It was like weird almost. Like so we have this like, this is so bad, but like there's like this word we call each other like boaters. And you've heard of that?
Yeah.
It's so bad. My parents get so upset like whenever we use that term, because it's like, it pretty much means like you came off the boat, like you migrated off the boat, which if you speak Arabic, you're like, oh, you're a boater, like you're weird, like. And so we have that, and then you get older and you're like, wow, like I love being like I'll call myself a boater, like I love Arabic music, I love to speak Arabic. So that's changed obviously growing up.
But wait, I now have a little more question, because I think there's something interesting there. Like, it was like when you're young, like being a boater is like maybe less cool, right? It's like let's assimilate, let's be in this culture, right? And then like what changed when you're now a little older? Is it like you're seeing a different value? You're seeing the complexity of both of those things? Like, what is it? Just so for me,
no, you're good. Nobody's ever like challenged me back, so like
I'm not challenging. I'm just curious.
Like
I'm
ask
curious.
me questions back. But so when I came to Edinburgh, it was like a culture shock for me. Like coming from the largest concentration of Arabs to Edinburgh, which is like there's like barely any Arabs. So then that's when I started to value it, because I like got into like I seen the American culture, and like the Arab culture is just so different. There's so much to it that it's just like so much. I don't even know how to describe it. Like coming from like what we eat to like how we act. Hospitality is huge. So then when I started seeing like that doesn't exist everywhere, I was like, wow, like I absolutely love my culture. And then like even how like I communicate with, like I always tell my roommates like the Arabic language is so expressive. So sometimes like they'll be like, what did your mom just tell you? And I'll translate it, and it'll be like, you're like the apple of my eye. And it's like, all that stuff sounds so weird in English, but like to say in Arabic, there's like so much power to it. So yeah, just like going out and like experiencing it, and then just realizing its value and worth, that like when I go back home, I'm like, wow, like I love this and I want this for like my kids, hopefully.
So like being a little bit away from it, you could see what it was. You could see it in another context, that maybe this isn't the same everywhere.
Have you experienced that, like in terms of like the Palestinian culture and like going away? And
yeah, I think, it's kind of, I grew up also in the Midwest, so there's like this mix of like, it's very, I think, natural in the Midwest to like be, and also within Arab culture is like this generosity and hospitality and responsibility really for other people, and I think that's like really powerful. And as I've gone to I lived in the West Coast, I lived on the East Coast, and it's I think it felt so natural to my life. And then seeing it in these different ways, like how you have to survive in these different places, or the culture of like New York, which is the power of New York is its anonymity. Nobody cares about you. And that's very freeing, because also there's complications about being known all the time and being also like in this role of responsibility, generosity. And so there's like this kind of freedom of being like, oh, I don't matter. And then on the other end, of course, it's like, you don't matter. So there's this other side. So like, I think part of being able to see outside of your context is really powerful. It reminds me of this like Edward Said quote, which I really like, which is, I'm going to butcher, but it's basically like, Edward Said is you know him?
No, I don't know.
Oh, he's so amazing. He wrote this book called Orientalism. He's a Palestinian writer, and he really helped. I think it was much broader than just Palestine, but he was talking about the West looking at the East, and this production of knowledge of what we know about the East, but recognizing we only know it through the lens of the West. So we don't know it from within its own culture and its own representation, but we know it from these outside Western perspectives.
Wow, okay.
So this was like really fundamental and early. I think now it's common in our culture to have these questions about the gaze, or like who's able to represent their own stories. But this was like pretty early on. I think he wrote it in like 68, maybe not, but somewhere early. But he writes really about what that does, and like how media represents us, like how like the written histories represent our region. Even the word Middle East is kind of being challenged now with this new concept of Swana, which is Southwest Asian, North African, to take it out of the context of Middle East, which is like determined by it's an orientation for the West to understand a place. It's not for us to represent ourselves. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. He wrote this quote about the power of distance, and how when you're away from your culture and your homeland, you can actually see it in this greater context. And with that, you both have anonymity, and you both have like intimacy, and that combination of intimacy and distance is where we can really like thrive.
Yeah, wow, I like that. Yeah, no,
Yeah, I'll
it's
send it to
literally
you.
just describes like the whole situation. But one question I had for you. So you're obviously an artist, and I don't know if this will apply to you or make any sense. But I know, like growing up, especially in an Arab household, my parents set not really my parents, but I know a lot of parents set an expectation that like doctor, pharmacist, lawyer.
Yeah.
And so growing up, especially for me, like coming out of it and being a college basketball player, is like outside the norm. And I know just being an artist has to be outside of the norm, but I don't know if you were like raised with like that expectation, maybe not from your household, but around you, and then like pursuing being an artist, like if that was different, or you felt like you were alone in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is a hard path, especially like I had, my parents are very supportive, but also it's like there's something that's so that can't be understood. I'm choosing something that's very hard, makes no money. Its influence is abstract, like you don't really know. So like it's not accountable in a certain kind of sense of value and contribution that I think is a part of what our parents hope for us. That we, can take care of ourselves, that we're safe, that we're cared for, that we're empowered. And also, I think part of what I grew up with is to also give back.
Yeah.
So my mom is an artist. So there was a model. Like my dad, fell in love with an artist. So like he was even outside of that model.
Okay.
But I think as I've gotten older, and this is my path, I think the fears are real for them. With support, but also like, I think in fields like art it's what success looks like isn't legible. It's not like I have this income, I have this house, I have an award, So it's something really quiet and inside of yourself of what success means. And that's what I've been trying to learn. And it's hard to explain. So I imagine it's hard for you to go on that.
So you feel like you're still kind of navigating those emotions? Like you still have you made peace with it? Or do you feel like you're still, like there's still all days where you're like, what am I doing? Like,
yeah.
Still have that?
Yeah, definitely. It's filled with doubt. It's filled with questions of value. What is art doing?
Yeah.
Is it selfish? I'm not married. I don't have children. I'm in my late 30s.
And that's a big thing, when you're I know with us, that's the main, I go home to family events. Oh, you found someone? You're getting married soon? No. You know what I mean? That's, the first question with us, culturally at least, Lebanese people. But when you're in those situations, that state of mind, what do you feel like you do? Or, how do you cope with those emotions and, get yourself out of that mental state?
Good question. I mean, I'm still coping. It's I think wow, that's a good question. How do I cope with it? I think right now I'm on this hunt. I feel like I'm on this hunt for understanding other people. I need a community, even if I don't ever know them, like writers or authors or guides to this path, because as you are walking down a path, you're forging it. There's not something linear that you can follow. That's okay, now I can do the next thing. Now I can do the next thing. So it's I'm trying to trust my intuition. So it's things that are quiet inside. But yeah, community is important. And intuition. But yeah, fraught with doubt. It doesn't go away.
Doesn't.
Yeah.
And so, who do you feel like has been the most influential person in your life?
Oh my gosh, I think it's so many people. I don't think it's one. I think I just borrow in certain ways my parents are very influential, even though our paths are very different. I have a lot of cousins that are creative. I think this generation, parents' generation, had to come and survive, and what that also meant is assimilate. And then our generation is trying to understand and process. They didn't get to process.
Yeah.
We get to think about it. They gave us the luxury of places to think. We're not in survival mode. We're very lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents have this conversation. Sometimes my mom will obviously see us doing things, and so I could just tell she's wow, I really didn't get that opportunity. And sometimes we'll do something, and she'll look at my dad and be like, it doesn't upset you that they got to do this and you don't. Obviously, my dad's so nonchalant. He's just no, I came to this country to give them the opportunity, and I'm giving him an accent because that's how he sounds like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like you're right. They do come here with the idea that it's strictly survival. I'm gonna do everything in my power to make sure my kids have a better life than I do. And so, yeah, that's just I don't know.
Do you feel like your path is something that your parents understand?
That's a good question. I don't know if they understand it, honestly, but I know they're 100% supportive.
Yeah.
There's so many accolades, so many things that I get that so I guess the Western eye or Midwestern eye, it's wow, Americans would praise me, wow, I just got this All-American award, and they were just congratulations. And my own parents are what is that? What does that mean? Who else got it? So all those awards, they just mean nothing to me now, because I feel in the grand scheme of things, they are nothing. Nobody cares about all that. At the end of the day, they care about how you made them feel. So just having that, them not understanding my path but being supportive is it's shaped me and my impact, because I'm I don't care for all these awards. They're not gonna. My own parents don't even care for it, so
Yeah.
it's like, why should I care for it? So that's just like a perspective, I guess.
Yeah. That's cool that they are supportive. You know, I think there's a faith, right? You have to sort of just trust
Yeah.
your children, the ones that you've imbued, you worked so hard to support, and then like let them find their path.
Yeah. And that's what I was trying to get advice out of him the other day. I had a tough decision I had to make, and I was like, Bob, please, like, guide me.
Yeah.
And he's like, just trust yourself, trust God, trust your faith. And he's like, I'm not gonna tell you what to do. He's like, you've made a decision for so long, and you've got yourself where you are. Like, just keep on doing that. And so just like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just like the independent energy that he's always just projecting on me. And I'm one of 5, so it was, yeah, my parents are them. So
That's really cool.
yeah, they're pretty awesome.
Yeah. What's their story, can I ask?
So they like migrated here. My dad did. He actually went to marry someone else, and then it didn't work out. He said he just like didn't get along, and then like met my mom within like 4 days, and like within that 4 days ended up like meeting her, and then they got like engaged, and then he came back to the States. He brought her back, I think, like 2 years later. So their like love story is like hilarious, but I think that marriage was like convenient in a sense. And then I always say my parents like fell into love the last like 10 years. So I think just like being able to like see it and then watch them fall in love is like been like crazy for me at least. So yeah, that's just like their story. And they're from Lebanon, and we go there often. And yeah, really supportive.
Wow. What does it look like to see people, like, I guess maybe how do you think about love?
I think it's just like a form of like accepting the other person for who they are and where they come from. And like, so like there's so many things that my mom just processes things differently, and my dad's like, that's just how she is. And like pretty much like he loves her for it, because it's like she's a product of her experiences, and I love you for being a product of your experiences, and I'm gonna love you that way. So yeah, I don't think there's like one definition for it, but just like loving them for what they've been through.
I see. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I like that. I think it's like it brings in all of our histories.
Yeah.
And it holds, yeah.
So let me ask you this question. So obviously in Palestine, you know, everything that's going on there politically, being that you are finding a way to be successful here, do you ever feel like you're kind of, I don't know how to describe it, like your people are there suffering, and this is on a day-to-day basis, and obviously the media doesn't project it how it is all the time. So how do you feel about that in terms of like you're out here living the American dream, and there's kids who are just, you know, like dying on the daily there?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think that it's really painful, I think we all live with this sort of pain, and like knowing that we are the very lucky ones. And also, what can we do? Like, what's enough? You know, what actually has impact? I think, you know, my sisters don't have the same draw. I'm like magnetized to our history in Palestine, and like my sisters have different approaches, which is fine. But there's like there's an opt-in. Like I have the choice to like give my energy to that, and my dad sometimes is like, why? You could do anything, you know?
Yeah.
Like live your life, be happy, you know? And I just keep finding myself drawn to this place and trying to understand what with my privilege and power I have, which is pretty little, but a lot too. Like what does an impact look like when this situation, when this like, you know, is worsening in terrifying ways right now, even more scary than I think I've ever seen it. You know, this government is, you know, validating and supporting like terrorist acts by settler movements, and So it's like, I don't know how to process all of it, and like also understand, like, I think for a long time I had a lot of like sadness, like even like existential depression of like, what do you do with your life? This is a gift. We have this short time. How do you use your energy? And I think what I feel what I've come to is that I can really affect my local. This whole big world is so big. All of my power can only affect my direct community. That's where I have power. So I think talking about Palestine is really important. Sharing with people, educating. I think it's not a priority here. We have the gift of being. I think U.S. is a huge country that we're not touching. Our borders touch only very few countries, so we're not as connected to news. We're not as connected to other cultures, like even in Europe. So I think my job right now is like communication and like talking about it and bringing attention.
So like what would you say like influences your art, and like when you're in a state of flow, when you're like just like doing whatever you're doing, describe that state of mind, and then describe for me like what's influencing you in the process.
I make really differently over the course of my life. When I was making glass, I think the state of flow is very much because you're like in tune with this group of people where you're all collectively working on something, and there's sort of a ballet on like creating something together. So in the making of glass, there's like this really powerful energy of like co-creation. Recently, I've been working more in my studio, and I listen, I read through Audible, like, or other like reading sources, a lot of news, dense theory, history, and then I'm making things. And so I think that process is like trying to like give myself space to like become more knowledgeable, and then through that let my intuition and body figure out what those things look like. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, because like sometimes you see you see a piece of art, and like obviously to me, like I'm an athlete, for example, and it's like a box, and you be like, people are like staring like, wow, like that's a box, that's a square, like. But then you have like people like with you who obviously value art much more than I would, and you're just like, wow, like look at that line, like, you know what I mean, like. So that's what I'm saying, like how do you find value to like things like that? Like I don't. That's like I'm trying to like.
Well, okay, good question. I think that there's like the art can talk to itself. I'm a little less interested in that. I think I want it to talk to everybody. And sometimes I've made a couple of projects. One project is this big installation of a floor pattern that was like based on my dad's memory of the floor he grew up walking on in our family home. And so I made these tiles, but I made them in spices. So that they had something you could smell. It was about the body, something you felt. And then they're also all loose patterns. So if you walk on them, your path is traced by, you're marked. You're moving the ground. It's changing. And so my role was to continue to build that ground over time. I would show up, put these tiles, sift these tiles down, and whatever happened, that was my job. I was going to continue to make this. It was very hard. It was a very painful exhibition, I think. It was just a lot of labor, but also like a bit sad when you give permission and like what people do with that permission. Is it about respect? Is it about, like curiosity? Some people just like wiped it, and which is, it's in the context of art. So like you don't, people have different ways. They don't know sometimes what how to do it, but it's
Right.
also like interesting. So I'm very interested in that connection. Actually, I can do whatever I want as the artist, but it's not doesn't feel complete to me unless it's received. The when it's real art, it's about
Yes,
somebody
yeah.
understanding it through their experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's fair.
So I don't know. Sometimes these like really esoteric works that are like a box or a banana taped to a wall is like kind of it's a bit insulting, I think, because I feel like, I feel the privilege of being in this field.
Yeah,
and-
you get it.
yeah.
You get it.
Yeah.
So I typically end the interview off with like, I guess like a question.
Yeah.
But since we had like more of a conversation, I guess my question to you is if you can give one piece of advice to any young girl, as a matter of fact, any human who's kind of watching this right now, maybe struggling with like we talked about, like the different identity crisis, or just like someone who's just pursuing a dream outside of their cultural norm, like what would you have to say to them based off experience?
I would say that you listening to yourself, following that quiet voice, even if it doesn't have a lot of room in the world, try to give it some space. And then also find people that see that part of you. I think community and intuition is like a really powerful combination. And I think what I was excited about meeting you is that I think you take it into action and you take risks. You put it out there. Try things. Experiment.
Yeah.
So I think it's very cool what you're doing to bring all these stories together.
Yeah, thank you for being just so open to just meeting a random new person, and just
For sure.
kind of sharing a little bit of our similarities, but our differences as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here today, and
Yeah.
I look forward to hopefully inspiring one other person in the world. So thank you.